Yeah.
What you think about that?
He didn't do it.
Just like that, in clear and direct terms, Charleston White proclaimed David's innocence, and he brought forward evidence no one expected. What he revealed changed the course of the entire conversation, leaving many to rethink everything they believed about the case. Charleston. White didn't just suggest David was innocent, he outright said it. When reports first emerged that a dismembered body had been found inside a Tesla linked to up-and-coming music artist David, the internet immediately erupted. Accusations flew, theories circulated rapidly, and outrage spread across social media. News outlets wasted no time framing him as guilty. Long before any legal proceedings began, fans dissected his lyrics for clues, interpreting them as veiled confessions. Corporations severed ties swiftly, eager to distance themselves from the controversy. But amid the frenzy, one voice rose above the noise, someone unafraid to challenge the narrative that had already taken hold. That voice belonged to Charleston White, a man known for his blunt delivery, divisive opinions, and unfiltered commentary. He took the spotlight when he publicly declared that the 20-year-old musician was not guilty. He didn't just offer an opinion, he stood firm, stating that the absence of an arrest was a strong indicator of David's innocence.
Yeah.
What you think about that?
He didn't do it.
Fuck out of here. All the evidence that's out there.
This wasn't just a throwaway comment. Charleston reinforced his stance with reasoning he believed was crystal clear. He pointed out that in the United States, particularly when it comes to young black men, arrests often happen with far less evidence. Charleston argued that if authorities truly had concrete proof against David, he would have already been in custody. He emphasized that arrests are frequently made with minimal justification, sometimes simply to hold someone while building a case. So, in his view, the fact that David hadn't been charged wasn't a sign of an ongoing investigation. It was proof there was no real case to begin with. To make his point, Charleston used one of his signature analogies: unfiltered, direct, and intentionally uncomfortable, designed to push listeners to think critically.
Listen, hold on. If they find a dead body in me and your car, and this is our car, do you think they'll let me and you stay out like long? They got out. So think about this.
That direct comparison captured the core of Charleston's argument. In his view, the average person would have been taken into custody immediately if a body were linked to them. The fact that David was still performing, still free, and moving around in public without being arrested, that, Charleston said, was more telling than any circulating rumor. But he didn't stop at pointing out the absence of an arrest. He went deeper, examining the claims that David had been involved with a minor and connected to her disturbing death. Online, speculation ran wild. Shared tattoos, leaked images, and even certain lyrics were interpreted by fans as hidden admissions. Still, Charleston rejected the narrative, calling it too convenient, too clean to be believable.
So think about this. If they got all this information on him dating a minor, an underage kid, and she looked like a white girl, mixed girl, what they let just stay free like this?
From Charleston's perspective, the story didn't make sense. A black artist allegedly involved with a missing 15-year-old with supposed physical evidence tying him to her death. And yet no detainment, not even temporary charges. To Charleston, that lack of legal action wasn't due to oversight. It signaled that David might not be the person the public was being led to believe he was. And staying true to his usual style, Charleston didn't avoid difficult points. He referenced how the body was found, dismembered and hidden, a crime requiring a level of calculation and cruelty that, in his view, didn't align with David's known behavior. He urged his audience to ask harder questions. Could this have been a setup? Could someone else entirely have been responsible? All this evidence supposedly proves he did it. The body was cut up and still no arrest. As Charleston's comments spread across platforms like X, YouTube, and Instagram, public opinion became sharply divided. To some, he appeared to be justifying the unjustifiable, defending someone whose vehicle had held the remains of a teenager. To others, Charleston was simply voicing what many were already thinking but afraid to say. Maybe this situation wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. Charleston White didn't just offer a quick opinion and move on. Instead, he kept returning to the case, emphasizing his perspective repeatedly. For him, David's continued freedom wasn't just unusual, it made the entire story hard to accept as truth. He brought up one of the most well-known legal cases in recent memory, the O.J. Simpson trial.
So you mean to tell me O.J. was found with a bloody glove, he was arrested immediately? Immediately, with all the circumstantial evidence they found on OJ, they placed it. So you mean to tell me they got all of this on this and he still get to move freely amongst America?
By referencing OJ, Charleston wasn't simply drawing parallels. He was pointing out what he believed to be inconsistency in how certain cases are handled. If someone could be arrested based on weak, circumstantial evidence, then why wasn't the same standard being applied to David, especially when the supposed evidence seemed stronger? Charleston then went a step further, introducing hypothetical scenarios that suggested another person might be responsible. These possibilities, while difficult to consider, made it clear how strongly he questioned the mainstream version of events.
So I'm saying, let me think outside the box. Maybe his mama done it. Maybe her mama done it and set him up. Maybe one of them racist uncles or cousins don't like her. Maybe the other boyfriend done it. Maybe the pimp who was sex trafficking her for the last year when she ran away done it.
These weren't carefully crafted legal arguments. They were unfiltered thoughts shared publicly, without legal restraint. But that's exactly why Charleston's commentary reached such a wide audience. He didn't speak like a lawyer. He spoke directly, emotionally, and without hesitation, something that resonated with many people. Through this approach, he presented a version of the case that, in his opinion, didn't make logical sense. He even pushed back on the widely discussed claim about David's connection to the victim, particularly the matching tattoos that gained traction online. Fans pointed to the shared Esh tattoo on both David's and the 15-year-old's index fingers as evidence of a close relationship. But Charleston was skeptical. To him, the tattoo didn't confirm a relationship. Instead, it was an example of how weak details were being exaggerated into damaging narratives. Then came one of the most criticized parts of his argument, where Charleston shifted focus to the girl herself. His words were seen by many as deeply offensive, but they revealed his core belief that David was being used as a scapegoat in a case full of assumptions and limited proof.
And I know they said, man, he wrong for calling her a little hoe, but she was. Little girl don't run away from home, little hoes and little
That comment wasn't just controversial, it sparked intense backlash. Critics claimed Charleston was shifting blame onto the victim, suggesting he was defending David by criticizing a young girl who could no longer speak for herself. But his supporters argued otherwise. To them, Charleston wasn't justifying anything. He was challenging the dominant narrative and encouraging people to consider whether the public story around David had become too one-sided. In Charleston's view, asking uncomfortable questions was more valuable than blindly accepting the popular version of events. He repeatedly emphasized the racial context, making it central to his argument. According to Charleston, America doesn't typically allow black men to walk free when accused of crimes like this. That point echoed widely across social media. For him, the most compelling argument was simple. If a young black man had truly committed such a brutal act, he wouldn't still be walking free. David's continued freedom, in Charleston's eyes, wasn't just an oversight. It suggested a deeper issue within the case. That's what made Charleston's perspective stand out. While others were focused on interpreting tattoos and analyzing lyrics, he zoomed out and examined the broader context, race, and how the justice system behaves under public scrutiny. By now, Charleston wasn't just raising questions, he was systematically breaking down the case and challenging others to disprove his position. His tone reflected the mindset of someone deeply familiar with systemic injustice. To him, this situation was never just about one artist. It was about a larger system that had rarely shown fairness to black men, suddenly appearing overly cautious in a case that looked like it should have moved quickly. Charleston's logic was unconventional. A body found in a car registered to David, accusations of involvement with a minor, lyrics that seemed unsettling. Most people saw guilt. Charleston, however, saw those same details and questioned why they hadn't led to charges. If the evidence really pointed to guilt, he reasoned, the justice system would have acted immediately. So, Charleston wasn't denying that evidence existed. He was arguing that there was too much of it, almost as if it had been assembled too neatly. And in his eyes, that made the lack of legal action not just surprising, but suspicious. For Charleston, this contradiction demanded answers. Charleston took it a step further, presenting possibilities that few were willing to entertain. What if, he asked, this wasn't David's crime at all? What if the entire situation had been orchestrated to appear convincing, but was actually filled with inconsistencies? Those hypothetical questions turned Charleston's comments into a viral talking point. Some dismissed him as reckless or irresponsible. Others, however, found themselves paying attention. In a world where celebrity scandals often involve hidden agendas and carefully managed narratives, the idea of a setup didn't seem entirely far-fetched, and Charleston knew exactly how to keep that angle alive. He repeatedly returned to one fact he considered impossible to ignore. David was still not in custody. He brought the issue into sharp focus. There was a death. David was allegedly involved with a 13-year-old girl. So, with all this supposed evidence, Charleston asked, how could it be that no arrest had been made? To him, the answer was straightforward: David hadn't done it. That was the position Charleston took firmly, fully aware of the backlash it would bring. He knew people would accuse him of minimizing the seriousness of the case or excusing behavior that demanded accountability. But Charleston had never shied away from criticism. In fact, he often leaned into it, as debates raged across social media, some calling him brave, others labeling him a troll. Charleston stood firm. He urged audiences to reflect on the countless cases where young black men were hauled into court based on vague suspicions, arrested on weak or incomplete evidence, and punished long before any formal judgment. And now, in a case that included DNA, tattoos, lyrics, and a car registered to the artist, still no arrest? To Charleston, that wasn't just unusual, it signaled something deeper: innocence. And for millions who watched and rewatched his statements online, it raised an uncomfortable question. What if, despite everything, he had a point? Charleston White's defense of David didn't come from nowhere. To understand why his words caught fire, why his take led to millions of reactions, and why some people gave serious thought to even his most extreme claims, you first have to understand the man behind them. Charleston White isn't just another online commentator with a microphone. He's a public figure shaped by controversy, a man whose life has been marked by crime, personal transformation, contradiction, and public spectacle. Charleston's background is as complex as his public persona. Born in Texas in 1977, his life took a serious turn by the age of 14. He was involved in a deadly incident outside a Foot Locker store, which resulted in a man's death. As a teenager, Charleston was tried as an adult, convicted of murder, and remained incarcerated until the age of 21. That chapter not only gave him a criminal record, it followed him permanently, shaping how people view him to this day. For his critics, it's all the proof they need that he lacks moral authority. For Charleston, it's the core of his story, a serious mistake that now fuels his outspoken views. After his release, Charleston made efforts to change course. He began working in the community and even started an organization, Hypocrisy Over Politics. Hope, aimed at guiding young people away from gangs and crime. At first, it looked like he was taking the route of redemption, using his troubled past as a cautionary example for others. But Charleston was never one to quietly fade into the background. His personality, energy, and drive to provoke consistently brought him back into the spotlight, not as a role model, but as a polarizing figure. By the early 2020s, Charleston had become widely known for his unfiltered takes and his readiness to confront anyone: rappers, politicians, and entire communities. He frequently called out public figures like T.I., Boozy Badass, and others, often using their names as part of his online critiques. But it wasn't just criticism. He often targeted their families, parenting choices, and public images. Each outburst gained attention. Each conflict brought in more followers. And each time it raised the same question: is Charleston White exposing uncomfortable truths, or is he just chasing attention by any means necessary? Take his 2023 clash with streamer Adin Ross, for example. During a live broadcast, Charleston pepper sprayed one of Ross's associates on camera, causing immediate chaos and legal threats. That single incident became a clear example of Charleston's character: unpredictable, confrontational, and hard to ignore. In another widely discussed moment, he flashed stacks of cash at hecklers during a comedy show, choosing to mock them instead of de-escalating the situation. To some, it came off as humor. To others, it was further proof that Charleston wasn't acting as a reformed activist, but rather as a provocateur, who thrived on attention and controversy, and that's exactly why people tune in, because Charleston doesn't just speak, he embodies contradiction. One moment, he's criticizing gang culture and speaking on personal responsibility. Next, he's making light of serious issues, insulting victims, and treating tragedy with sarcasm. In September 2025, He went so far as to publicly insult the family of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk after his passing, referring to it as just another case of white-on-white crime and laughing it off. That moment captured the dual nature of Charleston. Part social critic, part agitator, always stirring debate. So when Charleston White speaks, people usually fall into two camps. They either believe he's shedding light on uncomfortable truths, or they're watching to catch him contradicting himself. Either way, his voice travels. And that's why his focus on David's case didn't go unnoticed. Charleston's words don't exist in isolation. They land right in the center of public discourse, often loud, often controversial, and this time, he wasn't going after a rapper he disagreed with or a politician he opposed. He was aiming directly at the justice system and backing the idea that David was innocent. By the time Charleston lent his voice to David's defense, his public image was already shaped by a mix of scandals, controversial opinions, and viral outbursts. He wasn't a new figure entering the conversation. He was already a disruptive force, and his involvement only intensified the noise surrounding the case. In early 2024, Charleston again made headlines, this time for mocking the deaths of Chicago rapper King Von and Houston's Takeoff. He didn't just reference their names, he ridiculed them, dismissed their legacies, and called it a natural end for street life. Clips of his remarks spread quickly, solidifying his image as someone unwilling to show reverence, even in the face of death. For many, that was the turning point, where Charleston moved from being seen as a reformed figure to a provocateur fully invested in controversy. Then came the public clashes with Boozy Badazz. Charleston didn't hold back. He directly accused Boozy of being a poor father, claiming his parenting choices were pushing his children toward the same life of crime and instability that Charleston himself had once experienced. This wasn't just a personal jab. It was a very public critique of Boozy's family. And when Boozy responded, Charleston escalated further, throwing out threats that blurred the line between dark humor and serious aggression. To Charleston, this was about being honest. To his critics, it crossed into targeted harassment. Even law enforcement wasn't off limits. Charleston publicly criticized police chiefs, ridiculed entire departments, and once even claimed he'd shoot any officer who tried to confront him. The contradictions only grew. Here was someone who made a name by condemning gang violence, yet at the same time, openly embraced confrontation and threats of armed resistance. Still, Charleston thrived in the uproar. Every feud, every inflammatory comment only grew his audience. By 2025, he had shifted from activist to full-blown media spectacle, whether showing off weapons on Instagram Live or mocking rappers during interviews. Charleston had clearly learned how to turn controversy into content. So when he started defending David, many critics dismissed it immediately. They argued he wasn't fighting for truth, he was chasing attention. And what better headline for a provocateur than a rising teen pop star accused of murder? But here's the contradiction that made Charleston's role in the case so compelling. The more people accused him of clout chasing, the more his voice spread. Charleston's defense of David wasn't quiet or reserved. It was loud, public, and designed for reach. He shared it across YouTube, TikTok, and X, where millions saw it, debated it, and kept the conversation going.
There's nothing else put him in jail just to put a hold on him.
A dead body found in your car?
Listen, hold on. If they find a dead body in me and your car, and this is our car, do you think they'll let me and you stay out like long?
That short clip, removed from its full context, quickly went viral, gathering millions of views. Some users mocked him, others stitched it in agreement, and many left comments saying, "I don't like Charleston," but he's not wrong. This was the complicated appeal of Charleston White. His credibility was always in question, but his reach continued to grow. Even those who disliked him couldn't seem to ignore him. And that's why, when he unexpectedly stepped in to defend David, people paid attention. When Charleston White spoke up about David's case, he wasn't just reacting to the headlines. He was projecting his own life story onto the situation. To Charleston, David wasn't just a name in the news. He represented something larger, a reflection of Charleston's own troubled youth, and maybe even a way for Charleston to reclaim a part of his past through someone else's trial. For decades, Charleston had warned that America often targets young black men without solid proof. It was a system he had experienced firsthand. At just 14, his life was altered by a prison sentence. One teenage mistake became a lifelong label. That reality shaped how he interpreted every arrest, every accusation, every public scandal. And in David, he saw a familiar pattern. Except this time, the system hadn't taken action. Yet. They don't let black men walk free after crimes like this. Not in America. That statement wasn't just opinion, it was rooted in lived experience. Charleston believed that if the case against David were truly solid, the system would have acted already, just like it had with him. So, in his view, David's freedom pointed not to leniency, but to the possibility of innocence. But behind Charleston's loud delivery was a deeper, personal connection. David, like Charleston once was a young black man trapped in a story he couldn't control. Guilty or not, the public had already made up its mind, and Charleston understood that feeling better than most. In David, Charleston didn't just see a headline, he saw a younger version of himself. That was the irony at the center of it all. The same man known for mocking deceased rappers, targeting victims, and fueling controversy was now positioning himself as a defender of justice for a young artist the public had already condemned. Whether you believed him or not, Charleston's involvement made the story even harder to ignore. Because in truth, Charleston White wasn't just standing up for David. He was also defending his own story, his history of surviving a broken system, and his belief that justice in America rarely plays fair, especially for young black men. After Charleston's passionate defense of David went viral, the case itself kept evolving. New leaks emerged. More speculation surfaced, and official statements continued to stir public interest. Let's break down the latest update in the D4vd investigation and what it could mean. Authorities confirmed that the body discovered in the Tesla was indeed that of the missing 15-year-old girl whose disappearance had shaken the community. The details were deeply disturbing. Her remains were found dismembered, hidden in the trunk, and reportedly concealed in a way that suggested deliberate effort. To many in the public, this seemed like clear-cut evidence. Yet, law enforcement continued to say very little. Reporters pressed for updates, but officials stuck to a single response: no arrests have been made at this time. That line became a constant refrain, repeated in articles, news segments, and press briefings. Meanwhile, the internet reacted the way it often does, by turning the tragedy into viral content. TikTok users analyzed David's lyrics, especially tracks like Romantic Homicide, as if they were direct admissions. Music videos were scrutinized frame by frame for symbols and references that might connect to the case. Others started mapping out David's tour schedule against the victim's disappearance, hoping to find overlaps. But despite the intense online speculation, no concrete link has been made public. No DNA results, no eyewitnesses, no verified digital trail tying David directly to the girl's death. Only speculation, online theories, and a growing pile of circumstantial evidence. But the case wasn't sitting still. Behind closed doors, investigators were digging through digital records, analyzing cell phone data, and reviewing communications. They were now coordinating with out-of-state agencies, since both the car and the body had reportedly crossed state lines before being found. Each leak hinted at a much larger story unfolding beneath the surface. And this is where Charleston White's involvement became more than just commentary. It became influential. By publicly declaring David innocent, Charleston wasn't simply defending an artist. He was actively shaping public opinion. Millions of viewers, particularly David's fan base, began echoing his claims. On X, hashtags like NunchFreeDavid and #CharlestonSaidIt started trending. That's the strange influence of viral commentary. It doesn't just follow the news, it reshapes it. And in David's case, Charleston had positioned himself as the loudest voice in the conversation. As Charleston's defense spread rapidly online, the impact extended far beyond his own platforms. Mainstream media outlets, many of which had been covering the case strictly from an investigative lens, were now forced to mention Charleston White, a man with no legal background, no formal role in the case, but a massive and disruptive platform. Opinion columns began appearing overnight. Some labeled him reckless, accusing him of interfering with a delicate investigation by declaring innocence without evidence. Others, though hesitant, acknowledged that his argument about the lack of an arrest couldn't be dismissed entirely. Whether praised or criticized, one thing was clear: Charleston had pushed the case into a brighter and far more chaotic spotlight. Meanwhile, fans began dividing into opposing groups. On one side were David's supporters, many of them young, heavily invested, and quoting Charleston's words as fact. They shared his clips, referenced his analogies, and repeated his central message: if he was guilty, he'd already be behind bars. On the other side were critics, those who saw Charleston's defense as deeply disrespectful to the victim and her grieving family. online debates quickly escalated. Some users began doxing others over opposing views. What should have remained a serious, respectful investigation had become the internet's latest battleground, and brands were paying attention. Several companies that had quietly pulled away from David after the initial news broke now found themselves stuck in a PR dilemma. Do they cut ties entirely, risking backlash from David's loyal fan base? Or do they wait it out, wondering if Charleston's theory might prove true and David could ultimately be cleared? That uncertainty stalled endorsements across the board. David's public image was left in limbo, not fully ruined, but far from restored. Law enforcement, however, wasn't influenced by trending hashtags. While they never mentioned Charleston White directly, subtle pushback began to emerge. Leaks from within the investigation suggested that detectives were still methodically piecing things together, reviewing surveillance footage, examining digital communications, and collecting statements. Anonymous insiders hinted that the delay in arrests wasn't a sign of innocence, but rather a sign that prosecutors were being cautious, avoiding a rushed charge that could later collapse in court. But this quiet approach only gave Charleston more ammunition. He latched onto every pause, every vague statement, every no comment, framing them as proof that the system had nothing concrete. In Charleston's view, the delays meant they had no case. To investigators, those same delays were a strategic move. And as time passed, Charleston's voice only grew louder. Why would they let him stay free, lose endorsements, cancel shows, pull sponsorships, but not take his freedom? Especially in today's climate? It was a question few could answer with certainty. That lack of clarity, combined with Charleston's ongoing commentary, continued to shift public opinion day by day. What began as a homicide investigation had turned into something far bigger. It was now a debate about race, justice, celebrity, and who really controls the narrative in the age of social media. And at the center of it wasn't a police spokesperson or a legal expert. It was Charleston White. As the weeks dragged into months, the David case evolved beyond the details of a single crime. It became a reflection of how society engages with crime stories, celebrity culture, and online controversy in real time. And fueling that transformation was Charleston himself. More vocal than law enforcement, more provocative than legal analysts, and more viral than most reporters. The official investigation continued behind the scenes, carefully, slowly, and in coordination with federal agencies across state lines. But for David's supporters, Charleston's voice filled a void. At a time when the world seemed ready to discard a young star, Charleston gave his fans something to hold on to. Whether his arguments were solid or not, they gave supporters talking points, ways to push back against public judgment. And in the digital era, perception often moves faster than proof. Brands, followers, and the media found themselves in the same holding pattern, waiting for an update, waiting for an arrest, waiting for clarity. And in that silence, Charleston White thrived. Because the longer the case remained unresolved, the more his message seemed to resonate. The case remains open. The full truth has yet to emerge, but the impact is already clear. Charleston White didn't just comment on a national headline, he reshaped its momentum. He made the question of David's innocence as prominent as the crime itself. He turned speculation into conversation, conversation into content, and content into reach. For David, the outcome is still uncertain. His career remains in limbo, caught between a fiercely loyal fan base and an industry hesitant to move forward. For law enforcement, the pressure is rising. If they proceed without undeniable proof, Charleston's critiques may come back to challenge the credibility of the case. And for the public, this story is a powerful reminder of how easily facts can be overshadowed by algorithms, trending clips, and viral narratives. What's your take on Charleston White's take on the D4vd case? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tap the cards on screen to explore more.